Okay, everybody, in this video, we are going to digitize a sketch. Basically, we're going to take a drawing and turn it into a vector in Photoshop. So here I have my sketch from last week. Not great by any stretch of the imagination. Didn't really even follow the rules of the grid here, but it's going to work for us. You can see that I use the PhotoScan app on my phone in order to turn this into a picture. You can also just take a picture of it, whatever works for you. There are lots of free options like Adobe Scan or PhotoScan by Google that are apps on your phones that will allow you to scan things if you don't have a scanner handy. But a picture from your phone or camera will normally work as well. So I've got this in Photoshop. I just opened it up here. I'm zooming in. I'm really just going to focus on this second part of the logo here. This one down here, that's what we're going to digitize. And we're only going to use vector tools. Remember, there's two types of images, two types of digital images, rather. There's raster images made out of pixels, and there are vector images made out of paths and anchor points. Raster images are great for real-world photos, like a picture you would take. Vector images are best for things that are created on a computer. Adobe Illustrator is a primary program you would use to create and edit vectors. However, Photoshop does have a lot of vector editing tools and features within it, and that's what we're going to be using today. So here I've got my logo. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to recreate the type. Now you could, if you wanted to, use like the type tool, the pen tool, to go in and kind of trace your type if you would like to. And then remember, you need to go back to your beginning point in order to kind of finalize that. You can use your pen tool as often as you would like in order to do it. I, on the other hand, am going to recreate mine with a font. If you do use the pen tool, all you have to do is right-click it, and then you can fill your path with whatever color you would like. We'll select black and then click OK, and we've got it. That's not what we're going to do, though. I'm going to delete that path. We'll undo all of what we just did. Okay, so we're going to use type. Now, I've taken the time to already find a font that I feel like matches pretty well. But if you haven't, I'm just going to type out the word. I'm using mine in all caps. I'm going to hit Control-T and resize it until it's pretty close. Now, I've already selected this font, but if you were not quite sure what font you wanted to use, one thing you can do is you can select it. I just double-clicked until I had my font selected. I pulled up the character panel because that's the one that deals with type. And then you can just hover over it, and it will show you previews of what each of those different fonts looks like with your text. Now I'm using this one that I installed from Adobe Fonts. If you want to install something from Adobe Fonts, open up your fonts and click in the upper right-hand corner the little Adobe Creative Cloud icon, and that will pull it up where you can very easily install other fonts. Side note, I have my grid pulled up. That's done under the View menu. View, Show, Grid. You can turn your grid on and off under the same one. I like that grid a lot better than the one that I have on this paper. It's kind of silly that I'm using two right now, but that's what's going on. You can make yours snap to the grid as well. I feel like my snap was turned on, but let's see, snap to grid. It is, okay. Always smart to double check. And we're gonna leave that there. I like working with font that's an actual specific color. I'm sorry, an actual specific size. 281.49 is too odd, so let's just change this to 280. There we go. Now I'm just gonna drag off a copy of that, double click it, type out my next word, drag that over with my move tool until it lines up with the other one, drag out another copy, type out the next word, and we're just kind of repeating this process. There we go. Moving it over with my move tool. You're not seeing me go over to the move tool to hit it because I'm using hotkeys. The hotkey for my move tool is V, and the hotkey for my horizontal type tool is just T. So I'm going back to my move tool, making a copy of this. I'm making a copy by holding down the Alt key and dragging. Now, this is obviously not going to be a perfect rendition. Let's do this. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to select all four of those layers of type. And if I go to my move tool, you'll see that in my options bar, I get all these different alignment options. I'm going to click on this one. That one, make sure that everything is perfectly aligned on the left edge, which is exactly what I want. So there we go. So now I've got my text added. Obviously, this triangle is not going to work. I could size that down to smaller text, but I'm not really into that. I want this is a monotype font, meaning that all the letters take up the same amount of space. I feel like adjusting the size of it would not quite work. And I think they're all equally spaced. If you're not sure, you can select a layer and it should tell you, there we go, where the spacing is even between them. Sometimes you might have to adjust it multiple times in order to get it there. You can also do that to adjust them. An option in your options bar when you have the move tool selected, it distributes everything vertically so they're perfectly evenly spaced. Let's add our triangles next. Okay, so if you're using a newer version of Photoshop, you have the triangle tool. This did not used to exist in other versions of Photoshop. I'm going to click on that. This is still a vector. Remember, we're using only vectors in order to recreate ours. Currently, my fill is set to white and my stroke is set to nothing. I'm going to click in here and change my fill to black. Now I'm going to click and create a triangle. Now you can see that this triangle will only kind of go with the top at the top there, but I can rotate it. So if I hover around the edge, I can rotate this triangle and get it where I want it to be. Let's go to my move tool here, move it where I want it to be. When you're using vectors, another tool that's handy is the direct selection tool. The direct selection tool allows you to grab an anchor point and adjust it wherever you want it to be. Photoshop's moving a little bit slow here. Let's see, there we go. And it's wanting to snap everything to the grid, which is technically what I want, but I'm still slightly annoyed by it. Let's move this down just one more. So that's a pretty good triangle. Let's do the same thing over here on this side. Now, for the purpose of this assignment, we're sticking with black and white, but this can always be modified later. Like, for instance, if I wanted to change the color of this triangle, all I would have to do is double-click in the thumbnail and change the color there. But I'm going to keep it black for now. Because logo design, normally it's best to start off in black and white so you can see and make sure that everything has enough contrast. We're going to make one more triangle. This one's going to be bigger. Go back to my triangle tool, click and drag. Then I'm going to go to my direct selection tool, which will allow me to adjust it to my needs. Now, I did put this in the spot where I don't want it to go, so I can go to my move tool and move it over a little bit. But that's about the right size. That is pretty close to what I wanted. Just want it. I think it's going to make more sense if I have it like that. There we go. Last but not least, we had this terrible Texas that I drew. So I am going to go to a new tab. We'll pull this up. And I'm just going to search Texas icon. And these are all going to be raster images. And we're going to turn it into a vector. Let's go with this green one. So I'm going to copy this, go back to Photoshop, hit Control V to paste it, and here is our Texas. What I'm going to do is select the green because that's the part that I want. The best way to select just a constant blob of color like that is with my magic wand. So I'm going to click inside of this Texas with my magic wand, which automatically loads that as a selection. Now what I want to do is turn this into a vector. Now I could have, if I wanted to, traced this Texas with my pen tool. If you're really good with your pen tool, you should definitely do that. Instead, I'm just going to turn this selection into a vector. And I can do that with the Paths panel. If you don't see your Paths panel on yours, all of your panels, whether you can see them or not, are under the Window menu. So I'm going to go to Window and check Paths. That will pull it up. It's often in there with your Layers panel. I'm going to pull mine out. I have my panels here floating because that's just how I'm working lately, but you do you. So in my Paths panel, if you have a selection, at the bottom, you'll see an option pop up. This is Make Work Path from Selection. So if I click on this one, it's a little circle with some anchor points on it. What it does is it turns my selection into a path with anchor points. If it's not perfect, I could go back to my direct selection tool, click on any of these points, and modify them. I can also click on my handlebars and adjust them as well to get the exact shape that you want. I'm going to zoom back out. So I could just take this and fill this if I wanted to, but I'm going to be a little bit extra about it. What I'm going to do is make this into a shape that I can use again and again. So to do that, I'm going to go to the edit menu and just say define custom shape. That will pull up this little name a shape box. I'm going to call this Texas and click OK. I no longer need this layer, so I'm going to delete it. I also no longer need my Texas path, so I'm going to delete that as well. I'm going to go to my shapes, go down to the custom shape tool, and then click in my options bar and scroll all the way down to the bottom. And if you've made a new shape, it should be right there. There's other shapes that are default in Photoshop. Not any of them are super useful. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to now click and drag, and we're going to put this Texas right there. Now, if you hold Shift while you do it, it keeps it completely proportional the whole time. I'm now going to hit Control T and resize this so that it fits perfectly with my other type. I'm going to use my ruler to pull out a guide, move it so it's just a little bit north of that. We'll try to make a guide pretty close to the top as well, and it should be just slightly smaller. That way it matches my type. Okay, so here we have my version of this redone logo made completely with vectors. I just got rid of my sketch. I'm also going to get rid of the grid for a second so we can see what I did. So obviously I can see that I'm going to want to make some adjustments. You can make them now. You can also make them next week. We're going to get feedback from everybody with what we're doing here. I would probably move this triangle into a different spot, if not get rid of it entirely. Later on, we're going to add color to this, but for now, we're just going to keep everything black and white. Spacing is always vitally important when it comes to logos, so feel free to play around with that. This does not have to perfectly match your sketch that you've done, but you do want it to be based on the sketch that you created. The nice thing about this is all made out of vectors, so it can be resized completely, and it will never lose quality. We can also adjust it later on to add colors and everything to it. When we're done, we're going to save it as a PSD. So we're just going to say File and then Save As. That will bring up our little dialog box. It should default to Photoshop. You can choose where it's going to go. I'm going to throw mine just on my desktop, and we will call this Vector Logo from a Sketch. Make sure it's set to .psd, or aka a Photoshop file that will keep all of your layers. It is also a lossless type of format, and we'll make sure that the Maximize Compatibility box is checked and click OK. Maximize Compatibility will ensure that older versions of Photoshop can open up this image as well. If we were really smart about it, we probably would have cropped out the top part of it too. But there we go. We just saved it with all of our layers intact so that we can use it later on. But we just turned our sketch from a drawing into a vector using tools in Photoshop. Thanks, and have a great day.